I don't think that a continent which, in another 10 years, will be collapsing because of its birth rate, should be dictating fateful decisions to us. And even if that means we'll be at odds with Europe, that's not a problem. So when Russia's ballistic missiles reach Berlin and Libya fires missiles at the Vatican, and they don't have Arrow 3, that's fine, and Israeli intelligence won't cooperate with them. And I'm going even further. I know there are policymakers and opinion leaders who are listening to us and reading what we say. If Europe threatens us, we need to tell them something very simple behind closed doors. We can destroy Gaza every single day. Gaza will not be a wealthy place. It will not be a prosperous place. Over 100,000 Gazans have left, and more will leave. Right now, as I understand it, the Rafah crossing is unfortunately closed, but they will leave.
Hello, Topaz Ram, Vice President of Innovation and Strategy at Novo Millennium and a media personality. Thank you for joining us. We now have voices coming from the dying continent called Europe, which is putting more of a burden on us in terms of the political sanctions they're planning to impose on us over there. It made me compare the two, our record-breaking defense sales versus the European attempts to force all kinds of things on us that we don't want. I'll connect these two for me in terms of entrepreneurship and messianism.
Entrepreneurship isn't about just standing there like a block of wood and saying there's no solution. I do agree that Israel shouldn't burn all of its international credit and should act wisely. I don't think a continent that, in another 10 years, based on its birth rate, will be in collapse, should be dictating fateful decisions to us. And even if that means we'll be at odds with Europe, that's fine. So if Russia's ballistic missiles reach Berlin, and Libya fires missiles at the Vatican, and they don't have Arrow 3, that's fine, and Israeli intelligence won't cooperate with them. And I'm going even further. I know there are policymakers and opinion leaders who listen to us and read what we say. If Europe threatens us, we need to tell them behind closed doors something very simple. We can destroy Gaza every single day. Gaza will not be a wealthy place. It will not be a prosperous place. Over 100,000 Gazans have left, and more will leave. Right now, as I understand it, the Rafah crossing is unfortunately closed, but they will leave. Is Europe giving us trouble? Then we'll flood Europe with refugees. Then we'll bring down Egypt. Then we'll bring down Jordan and all the security establishment that keeps saying don't do this, don't do that. Maybe, just this once, we'll threaten the world and they'll actually listen to us. That's what Erdogan did, by the way, and it worked for him. Erdogan told Turkey and Europe, back off, or I'll flood Europe with Syrian refugees. Do you want that? So, when you look at the European continent, by the way, an Israeli victory is also a threat to Europe. And it's a threat to the global progressive culture. Because if you notice, when Israel came and said total victory, what was it really saying? It's saying, we want to succeed where the Americans failed in Vietnam, where the Europeans failed in Kosovo, where the Europeans failed in Ukraine. The West, since the end of World War II, hasn't achieved victory in anything. The Americans went through 9/11 and got bogged down in Afghanistan, and in the end, Pakistan, and they did nothing to Pakistan. The West doesn't win at anything, and in the end, the state of Israel will come along, being a country with a few million people in it, and show a victory. That shakes everyone up and scares them.
Dear viewers, please note, there is currently an escalation in attempts to silence Tove Channel. Naftali Bennet is suing Tove Channel for no less than 250,000 shekels. A gag lawsuit by a former prime minister against an independent media outlet in a democratic country. This must not happen. If he wins this lawsuit, the channel Tove Channel might be shut down, and that's why we're raising 500,000 shekels so we can keep bringing you bold content and fight those who are trying to silence us. So, our request is, support us. All the details are in the link below the player, and we will be grateful for your support.
The same institutional problems we have here also exist in Europe. It's not just unique to us. The European establishment today as well, and Western democracy in general, they no longer know how to find solutions, except for raising taxes or just accepting a violent reality. They don't know how to find solutions. The European technocrats are also really bad. And in my opinion, this is what, in the Israeli interpretation, people don't understand about figures like Javier Milei, or Trump, or Elon Musk, or similar types of people. They can come and say, I'm cutting here, 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 and here, and demanding efficiency. I demand that this happens. And the Europeans, you You look at it and you say, like, the Europeans are the people who destroyed our temple because they wanted us to believe in beauty more. Later, the Europeans adopted Jesus and Christianity, and they came after us because they wanted us to convert. Then from Europe came Nazism. From Europe came fascism. From Europe there was the French Revolution, which was one of the most violent events in Western history. I don't understand why they teach it in the education system in a positive light. If anything, the British and Americans are a good example of individual liberty, not the French Revolution. The word terror comes from the French Revolution.
We all know who runs the pedagogical matters.
Exactly. And if we go back thousands of years, when we had conflicts with Greece and with Rome, thousands of years ago, we believed in a king who was anointed. That's where the word Messiah comes from, messianic, from the anointing of the king. We had a monarchy, the most liberal in the ancient world. You don't know, you take the stories in the Bible, like the story of Naboth's vineyard, for example, okay? Where the king wanted the land and he held a false trial. In the Roman Empire, or in the Greek Parliament, the emperor could take a senator's wife and no one would say a word. He could legally take land. Because we believe in a king, our anointed king. Let's put it that way, while the Europeans believe in Plato's philosopher king. So actually, there's a clash here between the messianic and the philosopher king. The philosopher king is Plato's sick utopia, which claims that only the talented and the chosen should run the state, and that's where the word utopia comes from. And we're saying as Jews, excuse me, with all due respect, we don't worship the golden calf anymore. We don't worship Egypt anymore, and we're not going to serve bureaucrats anymore. We don't serve people of flesh and blood. We just don't do that. That's the essence of being Hebrew. That's why we left Egypt. We didn't leave Egypt just to get another pharaoh or to worship another golden calf. And when you look at the whole doctrine of, people talk about religion and religious coercion and all that. What do you call a society that sacrifices its children for human rights? What do you call a society that sacrifices the lives of its citizens for the enemy, for imaginary beliefs about peace? They are the religious extremists. You can say whatever you want about some ultra-Orthodox sect or whatever. They're willing for people to die for their fantasies. That's also why, why they took the peace with the Emirates.
You just made a crazy connection for me, because I was actually thinking about your question. What do you call a society like that? And the name I came up with in my head was Death Cult. And Douglas Murray just released a book, that talks about death cults in reference to Hamas, the death cult they established in Gaza, in the sense of radical Islam, that glorifies death and suicide. But the extreme left, actually, with the things you described, like sacrificing the lives of civilians and children for some foolish ideal, that's the reflection of it from the other side of the death cult.
Of course, you don't see this only among.
That's why the alliance.
You see statements. You see on Holocaust Remembrance Day, statements like, it's better to be among the victims than among the murderers. You see this culture that teaches you that if you're strong, then you're in the wrong. If you're not a slave, you're in the wrong. The Jewish people today, in the state of Israel, have been put into a ghetto. A ghetto, not with physical walls. A mental ghetto.
Yes.
Where they're not allowed to demand a better life. If you want to, and that's why there's a connection between Messianism and the high cost of living. I know it sounds like two completely different things, but there is a connection. Because if you come as a citizen and say, I want to be an entrepreneur, how does the state of Israel treat you? Like a thief. They'll make your life hell. The Histadrut will come and smack you down. Why should you make a profit? There's this whole saga about drafting the haredim, right? Which I'm putting that moral debate aside for a moment, regarding the haredim, as a segment of the population in Israel, compared to the larger groups. You look at our amazing reservists, at our incredible soldiers. There are more than 1 million people working in the public sector. For every 2 employees in the private sector in Israel, there's 1 in the public sector. Couldn't they have streamlined 10% of the public sector and given soldiers a decent salary? Or rewarded the reservists? Or recruited more people for career military service? They won't do it. Why? Because if you come and say, let's incentivize soldiers, what will people say? The messianic mindset believes in abundance. It believes in positive incentives. And the mindset of the elites in Israel, their mindset. There's a nice saying from Begin. They hate capitalism, but love capital. The people sitting on government pensions, sitting on piles of money, come and say, if a soldier gets money, he'll be a mercenary. Why on earth? Kibbutz and oranges? That's who we are.
Apparently, it serves someone. So the best way to understand who a specific problem serves is to look for who waves it around the most.
Right. It's not clever to just come and say there's a problem, okay? The question is, what's the solution? Now, who does the current arrangement benefit? Why does the IDF need more soldiers? Because it doesn't just bomb from the air. Because its deterrence is so weak that it can't just say a soldier will go. 5 soldiers will go into Jenin, and nothing will happen to them. That's why more soldiers are needed. Why doesn't the army have money? Because the army keeps wasting precision weapons to save the lives of Gazans. And who does that serve? Look at the IDF spokesperson's unit. The IDF spokesperson's unit, all its people, after they serve there, end up in the whole establishment political scene. And still, who does it?
And still, when there's a terrorist attack against us, it takes them 20 hours to respond.
Of course. And people ask, where's the public diplomacy? And then you see, the IDF spokesperson's unit is one of the biggest organizations in the world. It's up there. It's up there with Google and Microsoft in terms of PR power.
Wow.
You know, here everyone's talking about recruitment. Have you seen a single campaign from the IDF spokesperson to boost recruitment? To raise morale? Come join my fight. Or is all the money being wasted on the most moral army in the world for Westerners? Why don't they speak to the Indians? Why don't they speak to the Japanese? And then you come and say, as a citizen, maybe we should be more efficient? Maybe we should do something different. Maybe, heaven forbid, even lay people off. And then they come and tell you no. Gatekeepers? Absolutely not. And that's the anti-messianic mindset, the anti-entrepreneurial mindset that says if you take initiative and want to find a solution to a problem, you're messianic, you're terrible, you're blah blah blah. No, maybe it's time to tell this group of... I'm going to say it, and I want to say it. I know it's going to sound harsh, but the group of pensioners in the studios needs to understand that the Israeli public demands solutions. And if the establishment doesn't provide solutions, then we'll replace the people in the establishment. And maybe then there will be a solution. But you can't just sit there and say, I have tenure, I have a public office, acting like some kind of feudal company in Europe, where everyone becomes a lord of something, and all these systems are simply failing. You look, where's the public diplomacy? There's money for public diplomacy. There's a lot of money for it. They're just running it with mediocre, lousy bureaucrats who, in the private sector, would probably be unemployed. But if you want to fire someone, if you want to make a change, if you want to win, suddenly you're called a messianic? You know, these former senior security officials sit around and say, you can't win the war. You're saying it's impossible to win the war? I agree with you. So step aside, and maybe someone else will be able to. What happened?
Absolutely.
Why is it that in the Army, in the US Army, why is it that Americans are allowed to know exactly where every dollar goes in the American defense system, except for a certain classified black budget, which is also under government oversight? But here in the IDF, money is just poured out, money is thrown around, and people ask, where's the money? But who does that serve? You know, because if they don't talk about equal burden, and if they don't make the Haredim into scapegoats, not that the Haredim don't have some blame, but that's a different discussion. In the end, they're not the mainstream. They don't make the decisions. They can only respond to things. If they don't make the Haredim into scapegoats, then the problem won't be solved. 30%, less than 30% of IDF soldiers are combat soldiers. If you just gave minimum wage to IDF soldiers, you'd already increase the percentage of combat soldiers in the army, because many of them wouldn't have to deal with financial problems. Every day in the Israeli army, you have hundreds of soldiers in military prison because of the Ricket offense. What is the dance? Ricket is a financial problem. If you gave him minimum wage, he could go be a combat soldier.
Yeah.
But if they talk about the soldier, and if they want reform, and if they want change, they'll come and say you're a messianic, and they'll throw the whole conversation back at you. No one came and said, you know what I would expect from the opposition leader or someone from the opposition? And unfortunately, this is also something the coalition didn't do, which is just a huge failure of leadership. That someone would come and say, listen, Israel owes 1 trillion shekels in budgetary pensions. Let's give up 10%. I don't know by what mechanism, whether it's through a tax, 10%. If someone is getting 20,000 shekels in a budgetary pension, they won't go hungry if they get 2,000 shekels less. Has anyone taken such an initiative? Do they really care about the soldiers? If you care so much about the soldiers, then why do you support all this military advocate general nonsense and all that stuff? These pagan delusions about sacrificing people for the sake of humanity, if we're already talking about peace as an ideal, okay? The Abraham Accords came after the threat of annexing the Jordan Valley. Lebanon wants normalization after. After we took South Lebanon and Hezbollah, the terrorists, is still in Syria, soon the Gate of Hope, because they already took his previous one, and the Egyptians made peace with us after. In the Yom Kippur War, they realized we were capable of destroying them. Jordan made peace with us after it lost Jerusalem. The Messianism is the difference.
Dear viewers, please note, there is currently an escalation in attempts to silence Tove Channel. Naftali Bennet is suing Tove Channel for no less than 250,000 shekels. A gag lawsuit by a former prime minister against an independent media outlet in a democratic country. This must not happen. If he wins this lawsuit, the channel Tove Channel might be shut down, and that's why we're raising 500,000 shekels so we can keep bringing you bold content and fight those who are trying to silence us. So, our request is, support us. All the details are in the link below the player, and we will be grateful for your support.